Facebook has nearly 3 billion monthly users. If you think that's a lot, the social media giant claims they ban millions of fake accounts every day. But one particular account that has made headlines in the last several months was that belonging to former President Donald Trump. And now that Facebook recently upheld a decision to ban him from its platform, joining us with more on this First Amendment conundrum is our legal analyst, David Hoffman, founder of Hoffman Law Firm. It's good to see you again.
Good to see you as well. Thank you for having me.
So he was banned in January following the storming of the Capitol. They made a decision to uphold that ban. However, it's not indefinite.
That's right.
So there's a possibility that he could be reinstated.
That's right. What Facebook has kind of an internal governing body, sort of. It's not really a governing body, but it's like the Supreme Court of Facebook. And there are 20 people, and they're lawyers, former politicians, journalists, people kind of involved in the legal and the legal aspect of things, also with marketing and media. So it's a big group of people. The one requirement is the country where the complaint comes from has to have one member of this panel from that country. So there are 20 total. 5 of them make a decision. And what they did is they said, look, banning him following the January 6th insurrection at the Capitol was justified. But then what they came along and said is, but we don't think it should be indefinite. Rather, Facebook, you're going to have to make a decision within 6 months as to what you're going to do. Is it going to be a long-term ban, or is it going to be, is it permanent, or is it just going to be a short-term thing? Now, the interesting part of this, obviously, this part of the conversation really doesn't have much to do with the law, right? The part that we're talking about right now. This is just kind of by way of a little bit of background. Where the law really gets involved is free speech, because you've seen a lot of politicians come out since this decision saying, well, Mark Zuckerberg shouldn't be the arbiter of free speech. Well, that is a statement that is just not in the world of law, because Mark Zuckerberg can't be the arbiter of free speech. By the way the Constitution is written, there's no such thing as freedom of speech for a private individual. For example, I've got HoffmanLawFirm.com. If somebody wanted to post a political statement on HoffmanLawFirm.com, I can take it down. I'm not required to leave this up. There is no free speech in the private sector. So when you hear people coming along saying, well, he can't control what free speech is, you're right, he can't. He has nothing to do with what free speech is. It's the government moderating what is said. If it's the government that comes along and says you can't say this, that's the First Amendment comes along.
And I think a lot of people do forget this, because we have talked about this in the past, and all of the social media platforms, they're not government run. These are private companies. When you talk about the private sector, and then when you talk about companies, though, as massive as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, this goes back now to Section 230. And a lot of both sides of the aisle, they want to reform the Communications Decency Act. So maybe you could also kind of take us through what that act is, what it does, and how people want to change it.
Sure, absolutely. What that act does, and this is such a great follow-up, because what that act does is, if you run a social media platform, you are not responsible, according to the Section 230, of what other people post on your website. If you edit it or if you author it and it turns out to be fake, and it's baloney, you could be held liable for that. But Section 230 says that if somebody else is posting it and it's not accurate, then you're not responsible. Well, now go back to 2016, where all of our security agencies found that Russia was meddling in our 2016 election, and they were propagating similar stuff about Joe Biden in the 2020 election. Facebook is not responsible for that. Twitter is not responsible for that. So then you get into a whole huge issue. So when you are posting something that you know to be false, Section 230 protects Facebook. It doesn't necessarily protect you who knows it to be false. But one of the ironic things is that Donald Trump said he was going to cancel Section 230 because he didn't like the other spin. But if you cancel 230, then and you're putting out stuff that's not true, it's where does it really go?
This is a good place to take a break. We've got a couple of minutes left. When we come back, I want to talk about what some people view as the hypocrisy. If we're talking about Facebook and we're talking about social media platforms, let's just put it all out there anyway. So we'll do that in 2 minutes. Don't go anywhere. Welcome back. With just a couple of minutes left with David Hoffman, founder of Hoffman Law Firm. We've been talking about Facebook upholding their ban, disallowing Donald Trump, former President Donald Trump, to maintain a presence on their platform. But I wanted to get into just some of the hypocrisy that is displayed by these social media giants, and that while a sitting president is banned who had tens of millions of people voting for him, whether you voted for him or not, we need to kind of see the whole picture. And Facebook in particular still allows certain organizations in other countries, presidents accused of harsh dictatorship, China, Vladimir Putin, you name it, Iran, these different entities who are still allowed to utilize that platform to spread propaganda and their message. So how does one reconcile one without the other?
Right, exactly. As far as what other countries are doing and what they're promoting, I haven't seen that firsthand. I'm not on Facebook all that much. But just my sense of fairness is if you're going to do it to somebody over here because you're afraid the threat of violence is justifying your actions, you've got to do it to Venezuela. You've got to do it to North Korea. You've got to do it to anyone who is promoting any sort of falsehood to whip people into a frenzy. So no, I might not agree with the January 6th stuff, but I'm also a free speech kind of guy, even though this is not technically free speech. Mm-hmm. I am, when something is being put out on social media that could even remotely be newsworthy, I feel like I want to see it. I want to make my own judgment. But at the same token, if they're going to cut our leaders, then they need to do the same thing for other countries. What's going to wind up happening is, we've talked before about the Sherman Antitrust Act. They're going to bust up they're either going to bust up the big social media companies, or the government's going to come along and regulate it, which is going to really then get into the free speech, the First Amendment, which is what we're really talking about. Or these social media companies need to come up with a pretty powerful administrative board that can review all of the posts and handle this stuff. Because I don't think anybody wants to go into something thinking that something is real, thinking that this, it looks like news, it's cropped like news, it's got a heading that looks like news, but it's all garbage. I don't think anybody really wants that.
And as we've always talked about, people who indulge in information need to be discerning when they read it or hear it or whatever it is, and to do one's due diligence in cross-checking the facts. It's time consuming. So social media certainly made it very easy for people to quote unquote, get their information, but sometimes that information isn't always correct. So
algorithms.
It's all about the algorithms. Exactly.
It's all about the algorithms.
So at the end of the day, just to wrap us up here, David, what is the one thing that people need to remember when the argument comes up again and people are criticizing Facebook one way or the other, that it's censorship and yada, yada, to just understand that this is a private company, and
right.
A private company can do what they want.
You are not required to let anyone go on your Instagram post or whatever and tag you in something. You can untag them. Free speech does not apply to individuals governing other individuals' speech. Freedom of speech has to do with the government coming along and silencing speech. That's the only time the First Amendment, it just has nothing to do with with what Mark Zuckerberg or Facebook decided to do. The First Amendment, even though even though all the politicians are saying this violates free speech, no, it doesn't. That's just a talking point. That's just to stir people up. You don't have a right to say anything that you want. You just don't.
Whether we like it or not, they did what they did, and we need to move on. David, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Good to see you again. We're
Good to
back
see
in a
you.
minute.